No one goes into the mountains to die. People take risks, but climbing is about safety. However, the margin does narrow when you go to altitude. Climbers develop judgment, but when your judgment is wrong, that's when the game's fatal.
When it comes to mountain guides, Mark Whetu is one of the luckiest. At 37, he's climbed Mount Everest twice, the hard way, via the North Ridge, and he is still alive. Today he is leading a team of inexperienced climbers up the world's sixth highest mountain, Whetu, in Tibet. This is mountaineering in the 90s, sort of a summit lust. Anyone can conquer an 8,000-metre mountain. They can even ski off the top. It's an attainable high. But Mark Whetu is not so confident. He has a deep concern for the lives of his clients. For he knows how easily a mountain can become a ruthless killer. Mark's feet have paid the price of a freezing night spent on the highest point on Earth. But still he has to climb, to try and erase something more than a physical loss, a deep psychological scar. For Mark had to make an unbearable decision, to save his own life and to leave a sick and disabled friend alone on the summit of Everest.
Even though I tried my best, I still had this feeling that I could have done more. I guess it's just something that's instilled into you. I mean, you just do not do that. When I got home and having so much time alone to look back and go through all the what-ifs, I had this overwhelming sense of guilt.
In the spring of 1994, Mark Whetu joined an American expedition in Tibet to attempt the notorious North Ridge of Everest. Mark from New Zealand was to join up with an old friend from Australia, Mike Reinberger, who at 53 was making his 7th bid for the summit.
The fact that he hadn't climbed it was becoming the obsession. He was the sort of person that didn't really like to fail. He didn't accept failure. It's not like he took failure badly, he just didn't accept it, so he was determined to overcome it.
It's not very pleasant because you're fighting against a lot of different things. You're fighting against the fact that obviously on 6 previous visits you haven't been successful in the sense that you haven't summited. So you're carrying around with you a lot of baggage, which has to do with why in the past you didn't summit. So it's hard not to think at times what's going to go wrong this time, perhaps.
Mark had the job of guiding, and with another colleague, Mike Perry, was videoing Mike's summit attempt. Had he known of the epic struggle he would record, he may never have taken the job.
He was sick of failing. It was really starting to become the only focus in his life. He came home from Everest in 93. 93 was famous for 39 people standing on the summit on one day. And Mike missed out.
Mountaineering has a direct relationship with mortality. Mountains win respect for the number of lives they take. Mountaineers make their reputations for the number of times they can cheat death. But Mount Everest, Sagarmatha, Mother Goddess of Earth, exacts the highest toll. For every 6 climbers that achieve the summit, one will die. Nearly 150 ghosts haunt the parapets of this mountain.
I don't think my life is going to greatly change at all. I think at a very personal level I will be able to put something aside, and I think if I'm going to experience anything at all as I step onto the summit, it will be an overwhelming sense of relief, because I really have been making a profound commitment to this hill for a hell of a long time. At a pretty insignificant level, it would be nice to go back to my old school as the first person from my old college to have climbed Everest, and equally I think I'd be the first graduate from the University of Melbourne to climb Everest, and whether they ever get to hear about it and invite me over to have tea with the Vice-Chancellor or something, that would be fun. I don't think it'll mean wealth. It certainly won't mean fame, because Everest has gone past the point of claiming or providing fame for its summiteers. I think a real sense of personal achievement in my case will be the reward.
In this gamble with nature, the climbers will climb in 6 stages to what is called the death zone. Their destination is Camp 6 at 8,300 metres. There, on the threshold of the summit, the air is 1/3 the density of sea level, and the body is literally dying, starved of oxygen. It cannot generate enough heat to stay warm. The digestive tract starts to eat itself. The lungs and brain swell so much that the strongest climber can, without warning, perish with a cerebral or pulmonary edema. And if the body holds out and you are lucky enough to get good weather, you might have a chance to get to the summit and back. But the chances are that you won't.
Over the years of hearing about his summit failures, a lot of it was really based on his mountain judgment. He really, I don't think, had a lot of experience in decision making. He had a weakness, which was his conservative approach. I mean, we talked about it a lot, and I said, you're going to have to go for it. And he's like, what do you mean? He wanted a definition for go for it. And I said, well, you've got to, pick the day and, focus and really commit.
I have to admit that I find myself being swept along on a tide of great uncertainty. It's a now or never, a do or die, not literally I hope, but a situation that somehow I've got to adopt an attitude which I haven't done in the past. Something I don't easily get out of my brain at all is the fear of being caught out, the fact that perhaps one hasn't been quick enough to get to the top and get back to safety in daylight.
He had an incredible life, really. A very accomplished person in many areas. An incredible mind for detail of things. He could give you a 3-hour lecture on the origins of the English language. Socially hilarious. He had this incredible repertoire of jokes, but very entertaining. He was sort of that classic sort of around the campfire, around the dinner table conversationalist. He was sort of commonly referred to as the Renaissance man, because he was into sort of the classics of life in a way. I used to hate his music. God. He obviously couldn't sing because he always sounded flat when he was humming this bloody classic stuff that he always listened to, and he was always next door to me because we always had our tents close together. And I was always trying to outdo him with my favourites. And of course he couldn't stand Guns N' Roses or everything I liked, although I was starting to get him into Smashing Pumpkins a little bit. In a way, Mike was sort of like a big brother. The big brother I never had, perhaps.
How do you go through the process of psyching yourself up?
Primarily by letting myself be washed over with all the nice thoughts that would come from finally going home and being able to look certain people in the eye and say, well, look, finally, I've done the bloody thing. One more step. You can always make one more step.
Perry and I basically made a pact that it was going to take him and I to get him up. We're going to actually have to drag this guy up and get him up and get him back. I mean, that was the plan all the way, and we got to Camp 6 together. But unfortunately, Perry had an aneurysm of some sort and lost his speech, and obviously he had to descend immediately. So then all of a sudden I was there with Reinberger.
Having been up there so close now on several occasions and knowing the pain and the uncertainty, particularly I think the uncertainty that one has to go through, and it's got to be gone through. You can't sidestep it in any way. We've got to go through the pain and the uncertainty of the summit day.
Mike's troubles began really the night before because we'd planned to leave at 1 in the morning, but it was too windy, so we decided to reschedule, and we thought, okay, if we're away by 2 o'clock, we'll still be on for a summit chance. As it turned out, we didn't leave till 3:30, which really, unless you're very fast, is too late. And that's really what happened. We left and we were late.
The thing about Everest is, particularly on this route from the north, many of the difficulties, in fact probably the most serious and difficult parts of the route, happen on the summit day.
Climbing with him on that day, it became pretty clear to me that the climb was really blowing him away. You've got to deal with 3 steps, is what they're known as, the first, second and third step. It's steep, it's exposed, and you just happen to be in a down suit with crampons on.
Things were becoming very slow when when Mike came up the first step, and I just remember taking notice that he seemed to be very tired. It was really just before the second step that I realised actually how late it was when Dave Staley, who was with us on the summit attempt, he actually turned around and said, it's after 2 o'clock, it's too late for me. And I didn't realise it was that late. I thought it was maybe 11:30, midday kind of. And then I realised that there's no way we'll summit.
What I've been trying to do in preparing myself mentally for this trip is to try and anticipate all the things that could go wrong on a summit day and work out in my own brain beforehand how I might deal with them.
They're at the foot of the second step, and I think Dave's going to turn back. I don't know about Mark and Mike. They're moving so agonizingly slow. It's taken them 8 hours to get to this point. I don't see how they could ever make it.
By the time we got to the third step, it was late. It was getting towards evening as opposed to mid-afternoon.
I could just see Whetu and Reinberger. There they are, right by the first step. 28,700. Still going, slow. It's going to take them another couple of hours to get to the top that way.
So I said to him, this is it, Digger, it's all over, mate. We're out of here. And it was like I wasn't there, I was amazed. He said, well, how far is it to the summit? And I was just like, it's too late. It's a couple of hours away at least. And Mike just quite casually but very determined says, okay, we'll bivvy. Well, bivouac is like a shelter to dig a snow hole or find somewhere like in the rocks to find somewhere to lie down and wait for sunlight again to continue on down. And that concept just seemed to be outrageous to me, to be at almost 8,800 metres and He's thinking about bivvying at the third step.
Ultimately, your salvation, your health, your well-being with all your fingers and toes is up to you, and only up to you, because up there, ultimately it's your decision as to whether you think you can get to the top and get back into safety.
I tried pretty hard to turn him around, but by the way he reacted, it was quite obvious. Had I turned around, he would have continued for sure. I'm quite sure of that. I figured that it was safer to stay with Mike because of the fact that I knew the way. So I carried on with him and continued to film. He had that feeling that he could climb it, and he was that close, which he was. He was that close.
5:56. About an hour of daylight left. And about an hour from the top. Man, they got a long trip down. They're either gonna run out of oxygen or daylight. If they get down, they've pulled it off. If they lose their hands and feet, I guess they made a bad call.
Mike took a while to climb it. He was very slow, but once he saw the summit, once we were actually on the summit ridge, he did seem to pick up speed, and I think it was really a realisation that he was going to do it.
.655.
Yeah, 6:55.
They'll be lucky to get to the top.
Not till it's dark.
Full-on headlight dark.
When we got to the summit, it was obviously an incredibly emotional point for him, or time for him, because he just embraced the summit, which I just never imagined him to do that. I thought, being the classic sort of Renaissance man, he would have stood there in that classic mountaineer type pose with hand on knee. You could definitely sense his elation. He seemed to be very much at peace all of a sudden that he had done it. He'd finally, well, cracked that obsession, I guess. I finally got his attention and said, "Well, Diggy, you've finally done it. You've really done it this time." And then looking at the sunset, I said, "Right, we've got to get out of here now." And he quite happily stood up and started to, well, both of us, I guess, sort of stumbled down towards the beginning of the ridge. And by then it was dark. I mean, in a matter of 10 to 20 minutes, which put us literally 20 to 30 metres from the summit. I mean, I was just shocked to see how close we were to the top. It was just unbelievable. I guess the scary bit about spending a night out in the open without any equipment at altitude is you cannot expect to walk away without some type of damage, because of the extremity of just trying to exist up there.
Bivouac. French for mistake.
That night was definitely the worst night I've ever had in the hills, ever. The coldest I've ever experienced. I can remember halfway through the night that I'd had a water bottle in my down suit inside it, and I thought, oh great, I've got some water, because I was just so thirsty. And I reached in to pull it out, and I was shocked to see that it was frozen. And here it was inside my down suit, almost against my skin, and it was frozen solid. And I all of a sudden realised that my hands or my feet were going to freeze as well. Mike would lie on my lap, and I'd put my arms around him and hold him and cuddle him, and try and actually, as much as warm him, try and get some heat for myself from him. It just was amazing how long the night seemed to go on and on and on. I really didn't think we would, but we actually fell asleep. And I came to on top of Mike, sort of holding him. And he'd obviously been asleep for quite a while too. I knew straight away that my feet were frozen. They had a very numb sensation, very, very cold. It was just a sort of very wooden feeling. I'd sort of imagined that all we had to do was endure that night, and then once the sun was up in the morning, we could just almost charge down to Camp 6, pick up a bit of our gear, and then carry on down to our advanced base camp that day. And basically when we're at ABC, the climb's over. It's like you're home free, you've made it. But the next day turned out to be probably the hardest day I've ever had in the hills, ever. It just took forever to get started the next morning. Mike was incredibly slow. The descent just took so long. Mike was a long way behind me, and he just seemed to be getting slower and slower. I think it was some sort of 8 hours or more just to get to the top of the second step. And that's where our trouble started. So I said to him, I'll go down first, you abseil down, and I'll film you, because it's very steep, it's vertical, and it just looks good because you're looking all the way down the north face, down to the North Col. And he just did not seem to comprehend what I was saying at all, and he was trying to tell me something that I didn't really understand that he was saying. Just keep moving down.
Sorry?
Just keep moving down.
Again.
How? So he went down, and because it's steep, you disappear. And so I was waiting for a long time for him to get off the rope, and I could see the tension on the rope because it was draped over this edge. And what had happened was he had abseiled off the wrong side of this this block, and here he is just swinging in space, and I was just blown away because he was on very thin, stretched and totally shredded rope, sort of just swinging with no over and overhang, no contact with rock at all. I just couldn't believe that these thin strands of rope were holding him. It was just unbelievable. And that was really the beginning of the epic that it became, because he was so exhausted just trying to physically climb back up the rope with his petzels, his ascenders. And of course the intense worry of these ascenders biting straight into this few strands of climbing rope. They ripped, he would have had, as they say, the grand tour of the North Face. Once Mike finally got back up onto the rock, he couldn't say anything, and I said, "What's wrong? What's your problem? We've got to get out of here." I was getting quite sort of impatient. And he took 2 steps and sort of tripped and fell on his side. And I thought he tripped, but I thought he was lying down by the way he was sitting. I said, "Come on, we've got to go. This is just going to take forever. We've got to get to 6 tonight." And then he just said, "I can't see. I can't see." And I realised he's blind. I thought, "Oh shit, he must be snowblind." Because of the way I felt, I figured he was just more tired than me, that was all. Again, naive, I just didn't occur to me that it was then that Mike was really starting to suffer from the effects of altitude or lack of oxygen. That's one of the signs of cerebral edema at quite a high level. So I said, "Okay, well look, I'll just guide you around here. It's pretty straightforward. There's a fixed line here, there's a fixed rope that we can arm wrap around so you can hang on to." We got along a little way. He probably got about 4 or 5 steps, all linked really nicely. And then he tripped. But because of the safety line, he kind of stayed upright on the ledge. So there was kind of a system that was sort of working. And then we ran out of fixed rope. My primary concern really was Mike ripping me off this ledge. So I was trying to sort of set him up so that I had an axe in his right hand and I was still holding him with the short rope style in my left hand. So he was in balance, and it was just like, "Okay, move your right hand forward and then I'll pull your left hand and then step." We took a couple of steps and the next thing I know he's just airborne, almost ripping me off my feet. Fortunately, I'd actually managed to get my ice axe hooked into a solid bit of rock because it's quite loose. And he just seemed to be just lying there, just completely oblivious and not moving, just totally limp on me. And I was just screaming at him to get his weight off my arm because I was really losing arm strength just holding his weight. And it was then I saw that the impact had blown his down suit zipper open, and I could see a radio, and I'd completely forgotten about the radio. And I grabbed the radio and turned it on and just yelled out, "This is Mark, is there anyone listening?" And unbeknownst to me, the whole valley was just wired into scanning stations waiting to hear for a radio transmission.
Hey Mark, do you copy me?
And then I was surprised to hear Eric come on and said, "Yeah, hi, this is Simo, what the hell's going on up there?"
He's got a cramp of some sort in the leg and no blind, very, very out of it.
Simo said, "Well, look, you're going to have to leave Mike there. We're going to get someone to come up and help you. Others tried this morning, but it was too windy, but they left oxygen at the first step."
There's a full bottle at the top of the first step, and there's a full bottle at the bottom of the first step. Over.
And I mean, I could see the first step, it wasn't far away. For me, I thought I could duck down there real quick.
All you got to do is get your butt over there and pick it up.
That's great news.
I figured that if I could put Mike on oxygen, we could move much more quickly, and and once you're on oxygen, of course, you're a lot warmer. And I clipped Mike in and I told him, "Look, you're safe, don't move, and I'll be back soon."
Yeah, Jason is leaving Camp 6 now, and hopefully he will meet you at the first step and help you down. Over.
I guess I got down to the oxygen just before sunset, and there's a couple of bottles there. It took a while to find them, but I finally found them. And I clipped and put the hose into one and plugged her on and sucked that sweet air.
Right on. All right. There you go, Mark. Good job, Mark. So maybe you should just sit there for a couple minutes and suck some hose.
And Eric said, "Can you see Jason? He's coming up. We can't talk to him because his radio's not working." And I was like going, I'm not, I felt like I've been waiting for people all day kind of a feeling, and I thought, I want to go. So I said, "No, I can't see him." And they said, "Look below, he should have his headlamp on by now." And I couldn't see him. And then Simon said, "Look, go down the first step and see if you can see him from there."
My guess is he'll probably be cresting out onto the ridge probably in the next half an hour.
And at that point, I was starting to feel a little sort of suspicious about the attitudes of people at base camp. I sort of had this feeling that they were trying to sort of lure me away from Mike and leave him and save myself. And I was at that point determined to go back up.
This is a real tough call. Do you think do you think it's possible to get Mike down, or do you think he's too far gone?
I think if we could get him to Camp 7 and drop him there for the night with a bottle and some water, he could probably get himself down in the morning. Over.
I was just concerned that it was sort of like they were just like happy to write Mike off, just sort of so I can get down.
My concern is at this point, you, Mark, I want you to get down. You got a life ahead of you. You got a family and a wife and a business and a future, and I've watched you for the last 24 hours do one of the most incredible guiding I've ever watched. I just wonder if you've taken it as far as you can. I'd like you to rappel down the first step and start working down the ridge and meet Jason and go down to Camp 6 with him. Over.
No way, I'm not leaving him. There's no way I can leave him. I can sort of just walk away.
I don't think Jason's going to be strong enough to help you bring him down.
At that point, I'd had enough of talking with Simo, and unbeknown to me, Mike Perry was in the valley.
He's just arriving now, and I want you to talk to him. Over. fucking pits. You can't stay here if you're gonna cry, Susan.
Perry and Reinberger and me were pretty good friends. We were pretty close and had spent most of the time together on this expedition. So I guess it was just sort of incredible timing, because he walked into the base camp tent.
If we don't get the bottle tonight, I'm afraid that's the end.
Jason's never even climbed the first step.
I know what we're asking.
He's not going to be able to do... I don't think he's going to be able to get to him. I mean, Jason's got to walk over this knife edge he's never been on.
In the dark.
In the dark. And then come back.
It's absurd. Can we ask Jason to simply go as far as he feels it's possible for him without him going into the danger zone?
My feeling right now is that we got to get Mark down.
I know. That's priority.
I mean, this is Mike's holy crusade, and he made the top, and if he dies in the process, that's the way it goes. I mean, that's a hell of a thing to say, but that's the bottom line. You know, and the bottom line is that he doesn't take anybody else with him. But how do you get Mark to leave Mike? I mean, you got to give him away, and that might be the way.
Well, I can try various ways of doing it, like lying. Mark, it's Mike at base camp. Can you copy?
And he asked how I felt. I said I was okay, and he said, "You cold or warm?"
Pretty cold.
Mark, I want you to go down to Camp 6 now.
What about Mike? You know, I can't. You know, if I was warm, if I said I was warm, what would you have said? Go back up?
Jason is doing his very best to get to pass you shortly as you go down to 6. Carry on up the first step and go over to Mike. He's got oxygen. He's going to do his very, very best. You've already done that. Please go down to 6.
I was really shocked to hear him say that I should be going down and not up. I should be descending and not climbing back up to Mike. Just sort of that concept just blew me away to hear it coming from a friend.
I just can't imagine leaving the man on the mountain, you know.
Mark, I can't imagine going back to Edie and telling her that you're not coming back.
And I don't know what it was, but it was just something that said or triggered something off that I realised all of a sudden, because of the way I felt, that all of a sudden it just occurred to me that I had been pushing, I guess, too hard for too long.
Mark, are you going to go down now?
Maybe if I did go back up there, that I wouldn't be coming down.
You're going to go directly to 6, Mark? You're going to go now?
More than likely I'd have to bivvy, like spend another night out in the open with Mike, and then and try and come down the next day. And I really doubted that I'd survive another night out.
Go.
I just felt weak. I just felt, I guess, that I tried. I did my best, but I was going to be coming down alone.
Be very careful, Mark.
Okay.
So I clipped into the rope and pretty much fell down the first step, and then as if on cue, in walked Jason. He was there. So I just handed him the radio just like that. I'd had enough. I guess I was just, you know, I'd hit the wall.
We want you to both go down, Jason. We want you to both go down to 6, over.
By the time I got back to Camp 6, it was midnight, and I was just completely trashed. I guess I just sort of drifted off into a pretty exhausted sleep. And it was the next day, descending down the ropes, that all of a sudden I just had this incredible sort of growing sense of guilt that I'd walked away from someone. I was really starting to feel bad, thinking about Mike still up there, waiting for me. After all, I said I'd be back soon. I just felt, I guess, this incredible heaviness on my shoulders that I was going to have to look at people and say, well, you know, I had to walk away from a friend, leave him to die. I expected this distance that I was going to be asked, didn't you want to go back up? And it was never like that at all. At the bottom of the fixed ropes, outside ABC, there was quite a substantial welcoming committee. I guess I was a little surprised at the welcoming and open arms and how much people were glad to see me. We went into one of Russell's tents and the boots came off, and sure enough, they were pretty much frozen back to the joint of the foot. I was on oxygen, got food back into me, liquids and recovery. Oh, my mind was just racing so much. I was reliving those last few days, incredibly detailed about how I could have changed the events, how things could have been different, how I could have perhaps saved Mike. I was looking for an excuse to blame someone. I guess initially I picked on Simo and said that, he lured me away, he deceived me.
Above all, romanticism is filled with opposite extremes. A love of solitude.
But he knew that if I'd have gone back up, there would have been very little chance of me surviving.
Nostalgia for the familiar.
He said later that he didn't care if I hated him for the rest of his life, that at least I was alive.
That the unattainable is, after all, just that, unattainable.
Because he would have hated himself, having let me go back up and die.
I had people around me all the time, caring for me, which was great, but I was finding it quite sort of overwhelming. Just this people factor on me all the time. Are you okay? This caring. I tend to like to try to look after myself, and I wasn't really coping with this attention all the time. And I was desperate to get back to Queenstown.
I went to Kathmandu to meet him, and I'll never forget it actually when he finally showed up, because I knew that he'd been so very close to death, and it was just a miracle that he was there, really. It was a very emotional moment for me, really.
I guess coming back to Queenstown meant I was home and that the actual trip was over, but really that was the beginning of this whole spiralling nightmare. I didn't realise what a huge battle for survival lay ahead. The shock to me was that it was suggested I may lose my lower leg. Frostbite is an unknown quantity and you have to wait. I had to sit there and just day in, day out watch my toes die. That took 3 months for that to happen. It was obvious then that what had lived and what had died, which was then time for them to come off. And then after the toes came off, it was painful again to walk, and again I had to be sitting up all the time with my feet elevated.
I guess I spent the best part of a year on a couch.
The pain would keep him awake. It was a pretty difficult time for him.
I was actually trying to cope with two different things, my feet and the fact that I had to leave a friend behind. Trying to sort that out in my mind was really when, for me, the demons arrived. It was really dreams, nightmares, about the last moments that I was with Mike. I was holding and then my axe would blow out and I was just like catapulted off with him. Head over heels, somersaulting, feeling. And I'd wake up just screaming as if I was falling.
That's kind of how I began to drink quite heavily, I guess. I was feeling sorry for myself, and I was scared, I was kind of scared of going to sleep.
I guess I kind of call it my dark period. I felt that if I can't climb, what have I got to live for? I was at a point of depression where I had considered bowling a bottle of scotch and just driving off the end of the road kind of thing. I mean, I'd even had the site lined up and everything. And take the big exit. But one day, it was a really wild day. I just got out of the car and looked at this incredible beauty that, I live very close to. That really was the moment that I started to climb out of this deep darkness. It was just one of those personal revelations, I suppose, just being there and being surrounded by the things I loved. And I realised there was so much more to live for. Or felt like it was sort of the beginning of my road back to the Himalayas. And I began plans to climb Whetu, which is one of the 14 8,000 metre mountains. It gave me a reason to start to get back into shape, back in control of myself, and that was great for me.
I noticed that when we started to organise an expedition to Whetu, that he was very interested.
I had reservations, but I committed because it gave me a very sort of positive focus, and it turned into a bit of a race because my feet hadn't healed, but I figured I had enough time for them to heal.
It seemed to change him. It seemed he had a focus again to heal, to go back to the Himalayas, the place that he loves so much, and maybe try and come to terms with Mike's death.
It was like not only sort of light at the end of the tunnel, it was like, the tunnel was behind me all of a sudden. I was just like back out there, bright sort of sunny day stuff. It was a very positive thing, the most positive thing for me in 2 years of rehabilitation. The expedition consisted of a few Queenstown people and friends, and also people that worked within my business, Mountain Works. For all of them, it was their first time to the Himalayas. And that's not so unique these days. I think the uniqueness is the fact that all of them were on the 6th highest mountain in the world without any other Himalayan experience. I realised that all these people as my responsibility, and it was up to me to look after them and see that they had a safe climb sort of under my guidance. So I really had the responsibility of their lives in my hands.
I feel like Lazarus arriving from the dead.
My initial feeling when I realised my responsibility was a little overwhelming, if anything, because I had my own concerns. My feet. My feet were in a pretty bad way, and if my feet weren't right, I couldn't perform. If I couldn't perform, it was possibly going to affect the success, ultimately, or my next nightmare, the failure of the expedition. The anxiety of just having to walk was quite scary. The difficulty in Whetu is more its height than its technical nature. It's the 6th highest mountain in the world. It's 8,201 metres. It's big, it's very high, and people die on it. People were dying around us. Unfortunately, a German expedition leader died at base camp from pulmonary edema, which is a flooding of the lungs.
He didn't realise his symptoms, and unfortunately he died.
To see someone die, it's like, well, we've learnt from that. We don't need that as an example. No one does. You know, what is 6 weeks in your life if it's going to take another week to acclimatise properly? I mean, is it worth it?
That was an incredible eye-opener for our group, and the fact that these dangers exist and it can happen to anybody. And I think the group realised that it's a very fragile line that they're actually tied to. As the expedition progressed, the better my feet became. Funnily enough, the higher I got, the better I felt. And incredibly, they'd healed.
Whetu was very positive. We managed to sort of pull together all our resources.
Each person singularly contributed in their own way, that on their own aren't very valuable, but collectively as a group of 10 to 12 people becomes quite a strong force that does allow people to succeed where they wouldn't succeed on their own.
You can have many ideas, but to pull one off and see it work and to see it right through says to me that you can believe in yourself in terms of what you want to achieve. You know, if you really want something, if you really, really want it, you can go out there and get it.
Whetu for me was definitely getting back on the big horse that I'd really fallen off heavily. To get to the summit really confirmed everything in my mind that I knew I could do it. You know you're on the summit because that's when you see Everest. You can't see Everest at all until you're literally on the top of Whetu. And I could see the route that I've been on Everest so many times very clearly. And I was definitely trying to pinpoint the spot where Mike might be lying.
There was a funny feeling of looking up and knowing Mike's still up there kind of thing. Those memories of those last 2 days kind of come charging back.
It took a while for me as to how I came to terms with him dying, that he really got what he wanted. And he was happy about that. He had set himself out to climb Everest and really wanted to achieve. And I realised that I had no right to take that from him. It was definitely the high point of his life, I think, for Mike to climb, to embrace it the way he did, to just be there glowing in that sunset. And it was, I don't think that he could say that there was anything better than that moment in his life, really. I actually was the lucky one to share the summit with Mike. Looking across to Everest, that kind of put Everest in order. It was like the curtain was drawn, Everest was behind me. When you accept the fact that you are going to die, which it's not a case of if, it's just when and where, once you accept that fact, you actually really start living. It's not that life's so short, it's just that you're dead so long. So it's a case of making the most of it.